Welcome to the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast, a show all about reviewing dinosaurs on a scale of 1 to 10 fossils before only the elite terrible lizards make it into the Prehistoric Cage Match. This program is presented by the Stomp Tromp Roar Company and can be heard within all the rock layers across the planet. Grab your dinosaurs and your official scorecard because it's now time to dig for dinosaurs. Here's your Mesozoic host, Dinosaur Ranger Anthony.
Home on the range, where the T-Rex and the Spinosaurus play. Hey, who's out there? Show yourself. Oh, it's just you guys. You scared me there for a second. After what I just went through, I didn't know what was walking up into my campsite. Anyways, howdy all my junior paleontologists. Come have a seat around the campfire. There's plenty of room for all of us here. Now let me tell you, it's been a long day, and I just can't believe I made it out of there alive. Thankfully, I'm still here to be able to tell my, what should I call it? My paleo tale. But hey, who's your friend over there? I should have introduced myself. My name is Dinosaur Ranger Anthony, and welcome to the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast. And I bet you're here to talk about the K-Pg Showdown, aren't you? Well, boy, do I have a campfire story for you tonight. The last 24 hours have been a disaster. Or should I say, an ultimate prehistoric cage match. Everything just seemed like it was going to come crashing down on me. And let me tell you, those terrible lizards are no joke. Now let's all gather around the campfire for this tale between two of the most popular theropods to ever walk on our planet. Legend has it, they're known as the Tyrannosaurus rex and the Spinosaurus Aegyptiacus. But where do I begin? Maybe like every good campfire story should. Once upon a time. I'm just kidding. This isn't a fairy tale. We need to start with the roar. Everything started off like any other morning. The sun came up in the east, the rooster sang its song, and the theropods were still nowhere to be seen. That was until I traveled to the old west town of Barnum. I didn't know it yet, but that old dusty town would change everything I knew about dinosaurs. What's good? What's bad? Did they drool? Or could they really not see you if you stood still? Anyways, it was truly nothing like I had ever seen before, and that's saying something coming from a true dinosaur ranger. Let me just say this, it would have been a lot easier if I had just been a cowboy like Toby Keith, because a full-time dinosaur ranger is tough business. Now let me set the stage for you. As I rode into the town of Barnum, it was like something from an Old West cowboy show. It was a real-life 1883. All I needed was my best friend like Tim McGraw, and it would have felt like an episode of Yellowstone. Anyhow, as I stood there at the entrance of town, an old faded sign read, "Welcome to Barnum." The town was quite simple. There was just one way to go, and that was straight. The town was made up of only two dirt roads that made the shape of the letter T. The first road, or Main Street, was about 100 yards in length, or the same size as a Cornhusker football field. Then on each side of Main Street were old wooden buildings, with signs on each of them that read things like post office, sheriff, bank, butcher shop, general store, and saloon. Then at the end of Main Street was a T-shaped intersection with another set of buildings that sat at the top of the T. This street was called Broadway, and the buildings said Blacksmith, the Grand Hotel, Barbershop, and Church. There was also a stagecoach sitting on Broadway Street just to the left of the Grand Hotel. Then as you looked down Broadway Street to the west stood a wooden water tower with a horse trough underneath it. The water tower said Barnum, 1902. And oddly enough, that was the same year the famous T-Rex was found by no one other than Barnum Brown. I guess the town must have been named after him. I also can't forget about the occasional tumbleweed that blew through town. Like I said, this was a real-life Wild West town. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought I was in some kind of old cowboy show. Anyhow, as I started moving into town, I noticed everything seemed very quiet. I looked over to my left and I noticed a sign on the butcher shop's window that read Fresh Triceratops, 7 cents per pound. Then I looked over to my right and saw old unmailed letters scattered across the front boardwalk of the post office. Not a voice could be heard anywhere. You could have heard a cactus needle hit the ground. I continued riding into town as I looked for any signs of life. But sadly, I was starting to realize that I was all alone. As I made my way up to the general store, I decided to tie up my Parasaurolophus, named Presley, onto the wooden post just in front of the store. What? Did you think I rode a horse? Come on now, I'm a dinosaur ranger. Now, after I tied up my duck-billed dinosaur, I peeked inside the general store, and not a soul could be seen. Nothing but dusty supplies and old knickknacks. So I then decided to continue walking deeper down Main Street. It was a literal ghost town. There wasn't anyone or anything to talk to. When I got to the T-shaped intersection, that's when I realized that I had gotten myself into a little bit of a pickle. And here's where it really all begins. In a town with essentially no noise, I started hearing something loud coming from the distance, and every few seconds it got louder and louder. I glanced towards the horse trough underneath the water tower, and the water was spilling over the sides with each vibration on the ground. As soon as I looked back towards the entrance of town, there it was, the largest known theropod to ever walk on Earth, standing 50 feet long, 23 feet tall, and weighing at some 18,000 pounds. It was the Spinosaurus Aegyptiacus. This dinosaur from northern Africa scored a 9.2 on episode number 9 of the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast. And ever since losing to that T-Rex in our first ever prehistoric cage match, it's been causing all kinds of mischief ever since. This bipedal piscivore with its long and narrow crocodilian-like snout and frontward-facing eyes was looking right at me. I knew then there wasn't very much I could do. I just stood still, very, very still. For a moment I'd hoped it didn't see me, but boy was I wrong listening to advice from Jurassic Park. Its long and scaly body just stood still, its robust forearms out in front, its 6-foot sail on its back, and its fish-like tail stretched behind it. Drool from its 64 straight and conical-like teeth dripped onto the ground below. Halfway between myself and the Spinosaurus, I could see Presley frantically pulling away from the post it was tied to. Keeping my body still, I moved my eyes from left to right, and then I started to count down from 3 in my head. 3, 2, 1, go! I took off as fast as I could towards the wooden doors of the Grand Hotel behind me. Almost simultaneously, the Spinosaurus burst into action and started running up to speeds 18 miles per hour. Each three-toed stomp with its paddle-like feet shook the earth underneath us. As the one known as the spiny lizard ran past the post office, the unmailed letters flew up into the sky like a feather in Forrest Gump. If only the Pony Express had had a Spinosaurus in their stable, then maybe they would still be here today. As I took 2 giant steps across the old creaky boardwalk that laid in front of the Grand Hotel, I looked behind me to see all the commotion. My Parasaurolophus thankfully broke free from its harness seconds before being crushed by that Spinosaurus. Presley took off with its bipedal stance and ran away outside of town. I swung the wooden doors open and rushed inside the Grand Hotel. I wasn't really sure what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't just stay out there in the open. I passed the front desk of the Grand Hotel and grabbed an old iron key to room number 9 before I sprinted up the steps to the 2nd floor. By the sounds coming from outside, I knew this Spinosaurid had reached the Grand Hotel. I heard the front doors blow open as the meat eater dug its large forearm and its 3-fingered claws into the lobby. Its fish-like tail whipped across the drought-covered ground, sending dust up into the air before it crashed into the old stagecoach. Wood planks scattered across the street just like confetti on New Year's Eve. Once I made it up to the 2nd floor, I rushed down the hall, which unfortunately led me straight back to the front of the building. Room number 9 faced Broadway Street. I fumbled with the key for a moment before swinging the door wide open. Right then, I could see what appeared to be the Spinosaurus's back sail in the 2nd floor windows. Whether these back vertebrae were used for swimming, temperature regulation, or even recognition, one thing was for sure: it was intimidating. I quickly scanned the room for anything of value, but at first glance, all I could see was a quilt-covered bed, a clawfoot bathtub, and some old wooden furniture. When I looked over to my right, I noticed a pull-down hatch which led up to the rooftop. I quickly grabbed an old wooden chair and placed it under the hatch before pulling down the drawstring to the rooftop ladder. Coprolite! The creaky ladder instantly gave away my position, and all of a sudden the dinosaur named by Ernst Stromer looked up into the 2nd floor window. Its right eyeball looked right at me. As we made eye contact, I pushed up the door to the rooftop and I began my climb. The Spinosaurus tilted its 6-foot skull and swung its arm right through the wooden windows. Glass shattered everywhere as the spiny lizard tried to claw me out like a cat and mouse. As I made it out of that dusty hotel room, I started running across the rooftops towards the east. I jumped from the Grand Hotel to the barbershop and then to the church. And suddenly, all my prayers were answered. I heard a familiar sound of something that I had already heard once before. It was footsteps, but this time I knew it wasn't the Spinosaurus. As I reached the peak of the church rooftop, I held onto the cross and looked over the ledge. That's when I saw the king. Its pebble-like skin covered its 40-foot-long body as it stood 20 feet tall and weighing at some 15,000 pounds. But what was most incredible was the size of its overbite. The T-Rex's bite force was like no one else, and quite possibly the best of all the dinosaurs. In comparison, the T-Rex could crush 12,000 pounds with its bite, compared to only 4,000 from the Spinosaurus. Regardless, this was another massive theropod, and thankfully for us, it didn't end up being named the Manospondylus or that Dinosaurus. This is the one simply known as the Tyrannosaurus rex. This theropod from North America scored a 9.3 on episode number 1 of the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast. The T-Rex would also go on to win the very first Prehistoric Cage Match and would also become the first Clash of the Dinosaur Champions winner. Anyhow, the T-Rex was here to shut down the Spinosaurus once and for all those wrongful deeds. It was right then and there that I knew this is where the K-Pg Showdown was taking place. I was about to witness the destruction of two giant, terrible lizards, and in case you were wondering, not a single feather dropped from these two scaly meat eaters.
Round 1, fight!
The school bus-sized Tyrant Lizard King came around the corner with its bipedal stance and its stocky tail behind it. As the T-Rex turned right into the town of Barnum, it could see the dinosaur that had been discovered in 1912. The Spinosaurus had been found 10 years after the T-Rex, and it was still digging its right arm into the second floor window of the Grand Hotel. As the T-Rex stood tall with its powerful body, it looked down Broadway Street with its eagle-like forward-facing vision. It was just watching the Spinosaurus. Just then, the T-Rex did one giant stomp onto the ground with its right three-toed foot. The sound could be heard all across the battlefield as it left a 36-inch footprint into the dirt. Suddenly, the Spinosaurus stopped and turned its head towards the Tyrant Lizard King. The high noon sun cast each of their massive shadows onto the ground below. Without much time to waste, each Cretaceous period meat eater began stomping towards one another. It was like two freight trains racing towards the Golden Spike. I remained on top of the church rooftop, hoping that the massive collision wouldn't cause the Old West town to come crumbling down. As both carnivores collided into each other, the buildings began to shake. It was a collision of a lifetime and 165 million years in the making. The T-Rex stepped back, lowered its 5-foot skull, and swung upwards, giving an uppercut into the crocodilian-like lower jaw of the Spinosaurus. The momentum caused the Spinosaurus to stumble backwards. The T-Rex had to make sure to watch out for that fast Spinosaurus bite. It might not have been as powerful, but the snap speed of the Spinosaurus was superb. I started to make my way back across the rooftops in order to get closer to the action. I stood just above the barbershop, looking down on the greatest show on dirt. It was like something from the movies, Jurassic Park 3 to be exact. The Spinosaurus and the T-Rex stomped right back into each other with their powerful legs as they both started swinging their heads from left to right and right to left. Both theropods began to nail strikes onto the body of the other. The head swings from each meat eater slowly caused the dinosaurs to start rotating in a circular motion. Just then, the Spinosaurus connected a mean right hook with its crocodilian-like skull and pushed the Tyrannosaurid into the front of the barbershop. The front doors fell open and the T-Rex swung its bulky tail, destroying everything inside. Watch out for those scissors! As the impact of the T-Rex shook the entire building, I felt like it was going to come crashing down. I lunged off the rooftop and slid down the red and blue striped pole that stood to the right side of the barbershop entrance. As I hit the ground, I began to run back towards Main Street, but just my luck, the T-Rex stomped out of the barbershop and straight into the body of the Spinosaurus. I barely managed to get away before being crushed by the footsteps of the Spinosaurus as it stumbled backwards. The three of us made it across the street and in front of the bank. As I continued to avoid being crushed, I ran inside the bank and straight into the money vault. Peeking from inside, I watched as the T-Rex quickly opened its well-developed jaws as it set aim for the wide-open neck of the Spinosaurus. But in a blink of an eye, the Spinosaurus swung its body around to avoid a near-fatal bite from the 50 to 60 serrated banana-like teeth of the T-Rex. The incisors of the T-Rex slid across the back sail of the Spinosaurus. The T-Rex's overbite made just enough impact to draw first blood from the Spinosaurus. The spiny lizard's fish-like tail continued to swing wide and crash straight through the wooden walls of the bank, giving the literal meaning of the phrase, break the bank. Wood boards crashed into the ground as dollar bills floated into the air and gold coins came down like mini asteroids all around us. It was like a bombing raid which destroyed the holotype fossils of the Spinosaurus during World War II. As the spiny lizard's tail continued to swing forward, it struck the body of the T-Rex, and the impact was enough to stop the T-Rex in its tracks. The Spinosaurus spun back around and took a few giant steps towards the west before again facing the T-Rex. Back in the middle of the T-shaped intersection, a tumbleweed blew by. But just as both dinosaurs once again charged at one another, they collided into each other with over 30,000 pounds of force. Both theropods started swinging their heads again. It was like two evenly matched bulls. I decided then to climb my way out of the vault as I pushed wooden boards from side to side before running across the street into the saloon. It was then that I knelt down and watched from inside the corner window that faced the Grand Hotel. Each dinosaur began to spin around in a circular motion, causing a dust cloud to build up. It was like a Midwestern tornado. The battle then started to slowly move towards the west, down Broadway Street, with the blacksmith shop and the water tower in the Dino Twister's path. With both theropods taking hit after hit and blow after blow, they both appeared to be getting very exhausted. The Spinosaurus started walking backwards as the T-Rex began to push it towards the water tower. I rushed out of the saloon doors and onto Broadway Street, but after hitting all the piano keys on my way out, I made it across the street, just steps behind both theropods, and into the blacksmith shop on the corner. Fossil digging tools were everywhere, and for a slight moment, I even thought about grabbing a pickaxe or maybe even a shovel to add to my gear. But I had to get back to the action. Here it is! With a burst of energy, the T-Rex pushed the Spinosaurus forward and lunged its 5-foot skull down as it chomped onto the left shoulder of the Spinosaurus. Simultaneously, the Spinosaurus slashed its right hand claws at the side of the T-Rex's neck, drawing blood. The spiny lizard's 3-fingered claws caused the T-Rex to instantly drop its grip as it stepped backwards. The Spinosaurus's claws were definitely an advantage over the T-Rex's claws. Instantly, the Spinosaurus spun around and whipped its fish-like tail across the snout of the T-Rex, who was already stunned. The dazed T-Rex now stumbled 2 steps forward, only feet away from the water tower, as it began to shake its head. As the T-Rex slowly opened its 3-inch eyeballs, it appeared to be looking past the water tower and towards a small cemetery that lay just outside of town. Each tombstone read the names of dinosaur genus who lost before us. Who can remember the Allosaurus, the Megalosaurus, the Giganotosaurus, the Dinosaurus with the help from the Rhamphorhynchus and the Diabloceratops, the Alamosaurus, the Pentaceratops, the Carcharodontosaurus, the Utahraptors, the Ankylosaurus, the Brachiosaurus, the Carnotaurus, the Acrocanthosaurus, the Ichthyovenator, and finally, the Baryonyx. We will forever miss those dinosaur genus that fell during each of the Prehistoric Cage Match and Clash of the Dinosaur Champions episodes. As I continue to watch the battle from inside the dangerous iron-filled blacksmith shop, the T-Rex slowly started to regain its composure and could smell the Spinosaurus charging its way. The T-Rex pushed its giant bird-like feet into the wet sediment and braced for impact. The power of the Spinosaurus began to push the T-Rex closer and closer to the water tower as its feet slowly slid backwards into the mud. With a tie-up in the so-called corner, each dinosaur rested on one another just like two tired wrestlers in the squared circle. Both theropods had taken multiple hits to their body. The T-Rex had crashed into the barbershop and taken a big slash onto its neck. The Spinosaurus, on the other hand, had destroyed the bank and had bite marks on its sail and its shoulder. But who would come out the winner? Just then, I came up with an idea. I sprinted out of the blacksmith shop and made my way towards the T-shaped intersection. As I turned my head back towards the battle, that's when I witnessed the T-Rex with a burst of power. The T-Rex swung its tail and pushed its lower body into the base of the water tower. What is it doing? Two of the wooden legs began to buckle with the strength of the T-Rex. With one last push, the T-Rex used its small but powerful arms to lean against the water tower. The T-Rex may have had shorter arms, but it could still curl 550 pounds with a pair of dumbbells. I should also mention the T-Rex also had 3 claws on each hand, and not just 2. The third one was just so tiny that it was underneath its scaly skin. But what could the T-Rex be doing? Now the weight of the water slowly caused the water tower to fall towards the dinosaurs. Each theropod jumped to the side and barely missed the fall of over 500 gallons of water. The west entrance of town was instantly turned into a Cretaceous period watering hole. I continued to make my way back onto Main Street and entered the building that sat right next to the bank. I was in the sheriff's office. As both dinosaurs avoided the rush of the water and made their way back towards the T-shaped intersection, I witnessed yet another prehistoric stare down. I peeked out of the steel bars that covered the jailhouse windows and saw the meat eaters perfectly 10 paces from each other. It was time for one final draw. I thought to myself, which of these dinosaurs had just enough energy to come out on top? It was then I grabbed what I was looking for and made my way back outside just 20 yards from the stare down. As the sun began to fall behind the storefronts on the west side of town, I knew that dusk was near. In an instant, both dinosaurs with their advanced brains began a third and what I believed would be final charge. The theropods crashed into each other just like before, but this time the Spinosaurus reached out with its right claws and slashed the body of the T-Rex. The Tyrant Lizard King roared up into the sky. Was this it? Are we going to see the Spinosaurus win? The larger arms of the Spinosaurus were just too much for the king. With another slash of its arms, the Spinosaurus hit the left leg of the T-Rex with its 3-fingered claws. The impact drew even more blood from the Tyrant Lizard King. The T-Rex roared into the sky sky as adrenaline began to rush through its warm-blooded body. In an instant, the king lowered its massive head and struck the body of the Spinosaurus right near its dark heart. The T-Rex pushed the Spinosaurus forward and closer to where I unfortunately stood. With each step, the T-Rex was giving the Spinosaurus everything it had left to avoid one final slash. The Spinosaurus quickly started snapping its jaws over the T-Rex's head as it tried to send the T-Rex back into extinction. No! Suddenly, the left knee of the T-Rex buckled by the previous strike from the spiny lizard. The battle wounds from the Spinosaurus were starting to catch up with the king, and I knew this wouldn't be good. I thought to myself, the Spinosaurus had always been my favorite dinosaur ever since I was a little boy. But I also thought about the legacy of the T-Rex. The Tyrannosaurus Rex was the favorite dinosaur for so many children around the world. Chills started running through my body, and that's when I knew something had to be done. I could see the wounded T-Rex struggling to get back onto its feet. The Spinosaurus grabbed onto the upper body of the T-Rex with its large arms and started to wind up its tail. Then, with one massive swing of its core, the Spinosaurus began to swing its body around. The spiny lizard's fish-like tail started to move across the ground like a runaway wagon train. The Spinosaurus was aiming for the wounded body of the T-Rex. I quickly sprung into action as I lifted up the rope that I had grabbed from the sheriff's office. I began to swing my rope, and with one lucky toss, I threw it towards the tail of the Spinosaurus. Bullseye! The lasso wrapped around the fish-like tail of the Spinosaurus as it swung up into the sky towards the king. The lasso was just enough to catch the spiny lizard off guard as its tail changed its angle. Thanks to my ranger wife Elise for helping me get that perfect A+ in Mr. Cooney's geometry class. But unfortunately for me, the motion of this 18,000-pound Spinosaurus was too much for my 173-pound body. It was like 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. I was lifted into the sky and thrown across Main Street and back into the saloon. But that's when I saw it. The T-Rex pushed its feet into the soil. It bent its knees as it opened its wide jaws and shot straight up into the neck of the Spinosaurus. The impact struck the Spinosaurus into the next era as it began to stumble backwards. With no mercy, the T-Rex fully returned to its feet and began pushing the spiny lizard forward. The king locked onto the neck of the Spinosaurus and twisted it towards the ground. The light in the Spinosaurus's eyes quickly faded to black, and its arms with its three-fingered claws fell down to its side. If there was one thing the T-Rex definitely had over the Spinosaurus, it was its amazing bite force. The T-Rex then lifted up the body of the Spinosaurus just inches off the ground before throwing it down onto Main Street below. As I slowly continued to crawl from inside the old saloon, I knew the sheriff was in town. The T-Rex took one large step forward and put its right foot onto the stomach of the Spinosaurus before looking up into the dusk sky and letting out one last roar. Fireworks began to go off in the distance, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't jump up and swing my fist into the air. Now, whether those fireworks were from a local gold mine, I don't know, but for the T-Rex, it was well deserved. This is America's dinosaur. This is everyone's first favorite dinosaur. This is the Tyrant Lizard King, and this is the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The good guys always win. In the next few moments, the T-Rex would look over at me with what appeared to be an almost thank you nod before stomping back into the countryside. At that time, I knew I was lucky to be alive. This one's for you, Sue, Scotty, and Stan. The T-Rex is the true champion of all the dinosaurs. Now, would you look at that? The sun is already coming up, and we've lived another day to be able to tell our paleo tale. What did you all think? It was just wild, right? And thankfully, Presley even ran back to my campsite yesterday, so no worries there. Well, who's ready to find some fossils? Let's go hit the trail. But before I go, I think it might be time for one last sign-off. As for the Dinosaur Review for Kids podcast, it's truly been a pleasure, and I can't thank you all enough for listening. Stay tuned for my next podcast adventure, and I'll also make sure to post a podcast update episode here when the time comes. But remember, my name is Dinosaur Ranger Anthony, your prehistoric cowboy, for today's K-Pg Showdown, and as always, keep digging for dinosaurs. Oh wait, I forgot something. Here's the scary part of the whole thing. Later last night, as I went back to gather supplies from the general store to bring to my campsite just outside of town, well, the body of the Spinosaurus, it was gone. Roar!